Part 1. The ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system. Ambassador stood at the viewing portal and watched the small yellow star grow brighter as they approached. She had studied everything the galactic databases contained about humanity, which was not very much. They were young. They were fragile. They lived such short lives that most species wondered how they accomplished anything at all. And yet they had invited every known civilization to visit something they called the Cosmic Joy Archive. The invitation had gone out to 17,000 species, and it had been written in the most unusual language I had ever encountered. It spoke of gifts and celebration and something called happiness. The translators had struggled with that last word. They had no equivalent concept. A was made of living crystal. Her people had existed for 9 million years. They had witnessed the birth and death of stars. They had the rise and fall of countless civilizations. They had seen everything the universe had to offer, and they had grown tired of seeing. Her assignment to this diplomatic mission was considered a punishment. Only the most unfortunate were sent to deal with young species who had nothing worthwhile to share. The orbital station came into view as they rounded the third planet. It was surprisingly large for such a young species. A noted the elegant curves of its design and the way it caught the sunlight and scattered it in pleasing patterns. She felt a small spark of curiosity and immediately suppressed it. Curiosity led to disappointment. She had learned this lesson many times. Their ship docked at the main port, and led her delegation of 12 through the airlock. She expected the usual diplomatic reception. Formal greetings, careful protocol, the tedious exchange of meaningless pleasantries that preceded all first contact situations. What she got instead was an explosion of color and sound. Thousands of tiny paper fragments fell from the ceiling and covered her crystalline body. Loud noises erupted from small devices that humans held to their mouths and blew into. A massive piece of fabric hung from the walls with words painted on it in bright colors. Humans in strange and elaborate clothing danced and shouted and laughed. Afroze. Behind her, she heard her security team draw their weapons. For one terrible moment, she was certain they were under attack. A small human female approached through the chaos. She wore flowing robes of deep red and gold, and her face was arranged in an expression that I had seen in the cultural databases but never witnessed in person. The humans called it a smile. "Welcome to the Cosmic Joy Archive," the human said. Her voice was warm and loud. "I am Director, and we are so incredibly happy that you came." A's translation matrix struggled with the word happy. It produced several possible meanings: a state of positive emotional experience, a feeling of contentment, a condition of inner warmth and satisfaction. None of these concepts existed in culture. "What is the meaning of this?" I asked. She kept her voice calm, but her crystalline structure was vibrating with confusion. "Is this a form of greeting?" "This is a party," Director explained. She reached out and took A's crystalline hand without any apparent fear. "A celebration. We throw them whenever something wonderful happens, and your arrival is definitely something wonderful." I looked around at the chaos surrounding her. Humans were eating sweet foods and drinking colored liquids. They were moving their bodies in patterns that seemed to have no practical purpose. They were making sounds with their mouths that her translator identified as laughter. "I do not understand," I said. "What is the purpose of this behavior?" Director's smile grew even wider. "The purpose is joy," she said. "Come, let me show you what we have built." The director led the delegation through the station, and with each step A's confusion deepened. They passed through halls filled with strange objects and images and sounds. She saw representations of humans gathering in groups to mark the passage of time. She saw recordings of humans dancing around fires and singing songs together. She saw ceremonies and rituals and celebrations from every period of human history. "We call this the Festival Wing," Director explained as they walked through a vast chamber filled with colorful displays. These are all the ways humans have found to celebrate the changing of the seasons. Some cultures marked the longest day of the year. Others celebrated the harvest. Others welcomed the return of warmth after cold winters. You celebrated the movement of your planet around your star, I asked. Of course, Director said, any excuse for a party. They continued to something called the Life Events Gallery. Here I saw displays about human birth celebrations, where the arrival of new offspring was marked with gifts and gathering. She saw coming-of-age ceremonies from hundreds of different cultures. She saw bonding rituals where two humans promised to share their lives together, surrounded by their communities. She even saw death ceremonies, where humans gathered to remember those who had ended their existence. You celebrate death? I asked. This was perhaps the strangest thing she had encountered. We celebrate the life that was lived, Director said gently. We gather together in our grief and share our memories. We remind each other that the person mattered, that they were loved. I felt something shift in her crystalline structure. She did not have a word for what she was experiencing. The closest translation was a kind of opening, as if a door long sealed was beginning to move. They reached the final section of the tour, the recreation hall. Here, humans had built interactive exhibits where visitors could experience celebrations firsthand. There were rooms for something called birthday parties. There were spaces for dancing and singing. There was even a kitchen where visitors could learn to create celebration foods. When we discovered that we were not alone in the universe, Director said, we asked ourselves a very important question. What could we offer to species that were millions of years older than us? We had no great technology. We had no cosmic secrets. We had nothing that ancient civilizations could not have discovered long before us. She paused and turned to face us directly. Her eyes were bright with emotion that I was slowly learning to recognize. But then we realized something, Director continued. We realized that we had spent 10,000 years learning how to celebrate being alive. We had invented hundreds of holidays. We had created thousands of rituals to mark every important moment. We had figured out how to pause in the middle of our busy lives and simply enjoy the fact that we existed. I considered this. They had never paused to celebrate anything. They observed and recorded. They analyzed but they did not celebrate. The concept had never occurred to them. You believe this is valuable? I asked. This celebration. I believe it is essential, Director said. I believe that joy is not a luxury. It is a necessity, and I believe that it can be learned. She clapped her hands together, and suddenly music began to play. It was strange music, full of rhythms and melodies that I did not understand. But there was something in it that resonated with her crystalline structure, something that made her want to move. This is called a conga line, Director said. She took A's hands and began to guide her in a simple pattern of steps. You just follow the person in front of you and move to the music. There are no rules. There is no right or wrong way to do it. You just let yourself feel the joy. I followed. She did not know why. Perhaps it was the music. Perhaps it was the warmth in Director's eyes. Perhaps it was simply that she had lived for so very long without ever experiencing anything like this. They danced through the hall, a small human and an ancient being of living crystal, followed by 11 very confused security officers. The music grew louder and faster, and I felt her crystalline structure begin to vibrate in ways she had never felt before. And then something remarkable happened. She laughed. It was not a sound she had ever made before. It was not a sound any had made in 3,000 generations, but it came out of her anyway, bright and surprising and strange. Director laughed with her, and for one brief moment, a 9-million-year-old crystal being and a human who would live less than a century were united in something that transcended all the differences between their species. They were united in joy. Part 2. 10 years had passed since the first visited the Cosmic Joy Archive. In that time, everything had changed. Thomas stood at the observation window of the station and watched another transport ship approach the docking ring. This one was enormous, easily 3 times the size of the largest human vessel. Its hull was marked with the symbols of the Collective, a species that lived in the atmosphere of gas giant planets and had never built anything solid until they developed space travel. Thomas remembered reading about them when he was a student. They were ancient and brilliant and deeply strange. They communicated through patterns of light that flickered across their gaseous bodies. They had invented mathematics before most species had learned to make fire, and in their entire 4 million-year history, they had never once thrown a party. That was why they had come to the archive. They wanted to learn. Thomas smiled and turned away from the window. He had work to do. The main celebration hall had been modified to accommodate the visitors. The atmosphere had been adjusted to include the methane compounds they needed to survive. Special translation systems had been installed to convert their light patterns into sounds that humans could understand. Everything was ready. Director met the delegation at the airlock. She was older now, her hair gray and her movements slower, but her smile was exactly the same. Thomas watched from a respectful distance as she greeted the 3 massive beings that floated through the entrance. The lead was called something that translated roughly as bright current dancing. It pulsed with colors that the translation system interpreted as polite curiosity mixed with deep confusion. "We have traveled far to understand this concept you call celebration," bright current dancing said through the speakers. "Our species has existed for 4 million years. We have explored the mathematics of 11-dimensional space. We have calculated the eventual heat death of the universe, but we have never understood why other species waste time on activities that produce no practical result." "And yet you came," Director said. "We came because we have observed something troubling," bright current dancing replied. Its colors shifted to deeper shades that suggested concern. "Species that visit your archive seem to change. They become more cooperative, more creative, more willing to share resources and knowledge with others. We have calculated that this change has reduced interstellar conflicts by 37% in the past decade." Director nodded. "Joy tends to have that effect." "We do not understand joy," bright current dancing said, "but we wish to. If it produces such measurable benefits, it must have some underlying mechanism that we can study and replicate." Thomas watched Director's expression shift slightly. She was trying not to laugh. He understood why. They wanted to approach joy the way they approached everything else, as a problem to be solved through mathematics and logic. They had no idea that joy did not work that way. "Come," Director said, "let me show you something." She led the delegation to the festival simulation wing, where the archive's most advanced display systems could recreate celebrations from any human culture or time period. Thomas followed behind, curious to see how this would unfold. Director selected a simulation called Surprise Party and explained the concept to the. One person was designated as the guest of honor. That person was led to believe they were going somewhere ordinary, perhaps to dinner or to a friend's home. Meanwhile, their loved ones gathered in secret and prepared decorations and food and gifts. When the guest of honor arrived, everyone jumped out and shouted surprise, and the sudden revelation of love and effort produced an intense, positive emotional experience. The lights flickered in patterns of pure confusion. "You deceived the designated honoree," bright current dancing asked. "Only temporarily," Director said, "and only to make the revelation more powerful." "But deception is inefficient," another said. "Why not simply inform the honoree that a celebration is being planned? This would allow them to prepare appropriately and maximize their enjoyment through proper scheduling." Director thought about this for a moment, then she smiled. "Let me show you," she said. The simulation began. Holographic humans appeared around the room, setting up decorations and preparing food. The watched with their lights flickering in analytical patterns. Thomas could tell they were trying to understand the practical purpose of each action. Then the guest of honor arrived. The door opened. The holographic humans shouted surprise, and on the face of the guest of honor an expression of pure joy appeared. Bright current dancing's lights flickered rapidly. Thomas watched the being's entire gaseous form ripple and pulse in ways he had never seen before. "I do not understand," Bright Current Dancing said slowly. "I felt something. When the revelation occurred, I felt something in my central processing matrix that I cannot identify." "That was the beginning of joy," Director said softly. "It cannot be calculated or predicted. It can only be experienced." They remained in the archive for 3 standard days. Thomas watched them move from exhibit to exhibit, experiencing simulation after simulation. They attended a recreated wedding ceremony. They participated in a birthday party. They even attempted to sing along with a group of human carolers, though their light-based communication made this challenging. On the final day, something remarkable happened. Thomas was passing through the main celebration hall when he heard a strange humming sound. He looked up and saw the 3 floating together in the center of the room. Their lights were pulsing in perfect synchronization, creating patterns more complex and beautiful than anything Thomas had ever seen from their species. They were creating something new. They were inventing their own form of celebration. Bright Current Dancing noticed Thomas watching and floated closer. Its lights translated into words that surprised him. "We have reached a conclusion," they said. "Joy cannot be calculated, but it can be shared. We will return to our collective and teach them what we have learned. We will create our own celebrations. Perhaps they will look different from human celebrations. Perhaps they will involve light instead of sound and mathematics instead of cake, but they will still be celebrations." Thomas felt his eyes grow wet. This happened to him more often now that he worked at the archive. He had grown used to witnessing these moments of transformation. "That is exactly what Director hoped would happen," he said. News of the transformation spread quickly through the galactic community. Other species that had watched with skepticism began to reconsider. A species of rigid hierarchies and strict social rules sent a delegation to study human carnival traditions. The chorus, a hive-minded species that thought as one vast collective, became fascinated by the concept of singing together. But not everyone welcomed the changes. The Concord of Silence was an alliance of 12 ancient species who believed that emotion was a flaw to be overcome. They had spent millions of years perfecting meditation techniques that suppressed all feeling. They viewed the archive as a dangerous infection spreading through the galaxy. Their representative arrived without warning. It was a being called the Quiet One, and it looked like nothing Thomas had ever seen before. It seemed to be made of shadow and stillness, a presence that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. "You are spreading madness," the Quiet One said. Its voice was flat and cold. "You are teaching species to abandon reason in favor of chemical reactions in their nervous systems. This joy you speak of is nothing but a biological trick. It has no deeper meaning. It produces no lasting benefit. It is a distraction from the only thing that matters, the pursuit of pure truth through the elimination of all feeling." Director listened to this entire speech without interruption. When the Quiet One finished, she nodded respectfully. "You may be right," she said. "Perhaps joy is just a biological trick. Perhaps celebration is just a waste of time. I cannot prove otherwise through logic or evidence." The Quiet One seemed satisfied, but Director was not finished. "However," she continued, "I would like to invite you to witness something. Just observe. You do not need to participate. You do not need to approve. Simply watch and then make your final judgment." The Quiet One agreed. Thomas was surprised by this. He had expected it to refuse. Director led them to a small room in the family celebrations wing. Inside, A human family was preparing for the 15th birthday celebration of their daughter. It was a modest event by archive standards, just a few dozen relatives and friends, simple decorations, homemade food. The ceremony began. The young woman danced with her father. Her grandmother wept tears of happiness. Her friends laughed and cheered and took photographs. Thomas watched the quiet one watching this scene. He could not read its expressions, if it even had expressions. But he noticed something strange. The shadow that formed its body seemed to become slightly less dark. The stillness that surrounded it seemed to soften just a little. When the celebration ended, the quiet one left without a word. But Thomas noticed it was carrying something. A small party favor from the celebration. A tiny spinning device that made a cheerful noise when you blew into it. He never found out what the quiet one did with that party favor. But he liked to imagine that somewhere, in a temple of silence and stillness, a small colorful object sat on an altar as a reminder of something that could not be calculated or suppressed. A reminder that joy existed, whether anyone approved of it or not. Part 3. 1,000 years had passed since Director welcomed the first delegation to the Cosmic Joy Archive. She had been gone for 9 centuries now, her ashes scattered among the stars according to her wishes. But her legacy had grown beyond anything she could have imagined. Curator General stood in the grand celebration hall and watched the preparations for Unity Day. All around her, beings of every shape and size moved with purpose and excitement. Some floated, some walked, some existed only as patterns of light or sound, but all of them were working together toward a common goal. They were preparing to throw the biggest party in galactic history. Was human, though that word had become complicated over the centuries. Her great-grandmother had been bonded with the Chorus Collective, which gave the ability to sense the emotions of everyone around her. Her grandfather had been modified by crystal shapers, which gave her skin a faint luminous quality. Her mother had spent a decade among the, learning to think in mathematics and light. She was a child of the universe now, but she still knew how to blow out birthday candles. The grand celebration hall was enormous. It had been built over 3 centuries, expanding as more and more species joined the galactic community and contributed their own celebration traditions. The central chamber alone could hold representatives from 12,000 species comfortably. Today, every space would be filled. Walked through the preparations and smiled at what she saw. A team was arranging their light displays along the upper galleries. Their patterns had grown incredibly complex over the centuries, incorporating mathematical concepts that most humans could not even comprehend. But at the core of every pattern was the same simple message: joy. Below them, a group was setting up their carnival masks. They had adapted human Mardi Gras traditions to their own culture in fascinating ways. For one day each cycle, all social ranks were reversed. The lowest workers became temporary rulers, and the highest leaders served food and cleaned floors. They called it the Festival of Humility, and it had transformed their entire civilization. In the food preparation area, crystal chefs were creating cakes that physics. They had turned the simple human birthday cake into an art form that involved light refraction and harmonic resonance. The cakes actually sang as you ate them. And everywhere looked, she saw humans working alongside aliens, sharing jokes and stories and celebration techniques. The barriers between species had not disappeared entirely. There were still conflicts and misunderstandings, but something fundamental had changed in the way the galaxy related to itself. They had learned how to party together. The Unity Day ceremony began at noon Galactic Standard Time. Representatives from all 12,000 member species gathered in the grand celebration hall for the opening rituals. Each culture contributed something to the ceremony: a song, a dance, a blessing, a moment of silence, a burst of color and light. Stood on the central platform and welcomed them all. 1,000 years ago, she said, A small human named had an idea. She believed that humanity's greatest gift to the universe was not technology or wisdom or art. She believed it was something much simpler. She believed it was joy. The audience rippled with colors and sounds and movements that expressed agreement. She was right, continued, but she was also wrong, because joy was never just a human thing. It was always a universal thing. We simply helped others remember it. She paused and looked out at the assembled multitude. So many different forms of life, so many different ways of existing, and yet they were all here, united by something that transcended every difference. Today we celebrate 17,000 years of peace, said, the longest period without major conflict in recorded galactic history, and we celebrate it the way humans have always celebrated important moments. We gather together. We share food and music and stories. We remind each other that we are not alone in this vast universe. The countdown began. 12,000 species raised whatever appendages they used for such gestures. Tentacles and claws and crystalline formations and energy fields all pointed toward the ceiling. 3, 2, 1. The celebration exploded outward like a supernova of happiness. Fireworks erupted in patterns designed by mathematicians. Music played that incorporated sounds from every known civilization. Food appeared that had been prepared by chefs from 100 different worlds. And everywhere, beings that had never met before were dancing and laughing and experiencing joy together. Stepped down from the platform and walked through the crowd. She shook hands and tentacles and energy tendrils. She accepted hugs and blessings and ritual greetings. She danced with an ambassador whose crystalline form sparkled with colors she had never seen before. Eventually, she made her way to a small wing at the edge of the original station. This area had been preserved exactly as it was 1,000 years ago. Behind an environmental shield, the very first exhibit of the Cosmic Joy Archive remained untouched. It was a simple display. A child's birthday party from the early 21st century, paper plates on a plastic table, a lopsided homemade cake with crooked candles, 6 children in cardboard party hats. Everything about it was modest and imperfect and utterly beautiful. Stood before the exhibit and felt tears forming in her eyes. This happened every time she visited. The sight of that simple celebration reminded her of everything the archive had been built to preserve. Not perfection, not grand gestures, not expensive technology. Just love, just joy, just the simple human belief that every moment of existence was worth celebrating. A voice spoke beside her. It was Director's great-great-great-granddaughter, a young woman named who worked in the Historical Preservation Department. She would have been amazed, said softly, my ancestor, if she could see what her idea became. Nodded, I think she would have thrown a party. They stood together in silence for a moment, honoring the past, then smiled. We should get back, she said. The conga line is about to start. Laughed, some traditions never changed. They walked back toward the grand celebration hall, passing through corridors filled with joy. Somewhere ahead, music was playing. Voices were singing. Beings that should have had nothing in common were dancing together. As joined the conga line, she thought about what humanity had really given the universe. It was not the archive itself, though that had certainly helped. It was not the parties or the holidays or the celebration techniques. It was permission. Permission to pause. Permission to gather. Permission to acknowledge that existence itself, in all its strange and wonderful and temporary beauty, was worth celebrating. Before humanity arrived, most species had believed that celebration was frivolous, a waste of resources and time, something to be as civilizations matured. Humanity had proven them wrong. Joy was not frivolous. It was essential. It was the glue that held communities together. It was the light that pushed back against the darkness of the universe. It was the thread that wove individuals into something greater than themselves. The conga line wound through the station. growing longer with every moment. Beings that could not speak each other's languages danced together anyway. Beings that had been enemies for laughed side by side. And at the head of the line, a human woman danced and smiled and cried happy tears, just as Director had done 1,000 years before. The universe was vast and cold and mostly empty. But in this one small corner of it, joy exploded like a supernova. And that was enough.